A little bit about the T-34. I'm doing okay on time, I hope. This is a summary of the T-34 fracture locations. As some of you may be aware, we've had 3 wing failures since 1999. In the 1999 accident, and that little circle right there actually should be right in there. It failed the front spar. There's a build-up structure there. There were multiple fatigue cracks there. There was also a crack in this rear bathtub fitting. The 2003 failures, same place, exact same location as this one, and then we had fatigue cracks back here. And then the 2004 accident, we had fatigue cracks here, and we had fatigue cracks in the carry-through because that airplane had a reinforced wing spar, so it cracked in here, multiple cracking in there. That's the cross-section of that area. And these channels were cracked. This channel was cracked completely, and there were cracks coming out of there, and out of there, and out of there, and out of the skin. There was cracks all over the place there. In addition, we found fatigue cracks in horizontal tail. So what this was telling us after the 3rd time, and there's a lot of other history that goes into the possible usage of these airplanes, and have they been fixed and have they not been fixed. But we found fatigue here, and fatigue here, fatigue here, fatigue here, fatigue on the horizontal tail on multiple airplanes, and that's saying this model of airplane is starting to wear out because it wasn't just limited to airplanes used very, very severely. When they subsequently went out and inspected airplanes to look for cracks here, they found some on airplanes that quote-unquote had been, this is Marv Nuss speaking, only driven to and from church. They weren't out there turning and burning. So it's not just a high severe usage. Certainly that has a lot to do with it. But some airplanes have better genes than others. There's a guy in my office says, you know, the airplane that they may have found cracked at an early age, that's kind of like, guys remember who Jim Fix was? He was that guy who wrote a book back 20, 30 years ago on running and running for your health and all of that. And he died at the age of 51. And you know, the reason he started running was because all of his male father and uncle and all that sort of stuff had died in the 40s of a heart attack. So he says, if I want to make it to 50, I've got to do things right. Well, he still died at an early age, and we all know people who've died at an early age. So you've got the bad genes, and then you've got people like Mick Jagger. So if Mick took care of himself, we might be listening to his music 50 years from now, you know? So I don't know if that's good or bad. Okay. A little bit of a graphic here to kind of hopefully pull all this together. Do you have flight critical structure? In other words, if that structure broke, would your airplane come down? If the answer is no, don't worry about it. If the answer is yes, then you got to say, is it susceptible to fatigue? And what we're looking at there is tension loads. That first slide talked about tension. That's when you're trying to pull things apart instead of push them together. So the underside of your wing is usually in tension because it's trying to pull things apart, okay? So if it's susceptible to fatigue, can I find the crack before I lose that required limit strength? If I can find it, then I can go over here and I can inspect for it. Do I find a crack? No, then I inspect it. The T6 is sitting right here. We've got a 200-hour repetitive inspection on those angles. Every 200 hours we're going to be looking for those cracks. And as long as they stay in this little loop, everything's okay. If we find a crack, we can replace, repair, modify. In the case of T6, that would be new angles. But maybe there's a repair that can be done for a particular airplane, that sort of thing. And then we go back in and we stay in this inspection mode for that new part. If we can't reliably detect it, and this would be the 402 situation, the Cessna 400 situation, because the crack was too small. We couldn't find it in time, right? So we've got to modify or retire. So the modification of that was that wing strap, which in effect retires that wing there because the stresses in the wing spar itself go way down with the strap. I think there's a repetitive inspection in the AD every 20,000 hours. They have to go inspect that. So we've basically given another 20,000 hours to the 402 by modifying it. So we've got some of those 30,000 hour guys will be 50,000 hours. When will that be? So we can do that. Now, the other thing we've got to keep in mind, and this is the ag plane, and the T-34 is kind of sitting over here right now too, because if I were to go back, let me do that real quick. because there's a bit of an issue. The question they have is, we can inspect this area here. We can inspect this inner channel. They can come in through what they call the mouse hole, come up in here, and they can do an eddy current inspection of these fasteners right here. Go around those fasteners. But the outer channel is uninspectable. Well, the outer channel is cracking too. There is no guarantee that if they don't find cracks here, that there are no cracks here. Okay? So what it amounts to is ultimately they're going to have to come up with a fix before those airplanes are going to be able to go much more. Right now, they've got an inspection here that we have given them 240 hours because we know that we've got some crack growth capability there that even if they couldn't find cracks there, they've got enough time to go 240 hours. Not every 240 hours, 240 hours. So some of those airplanes have used their 240 hours up, and now they wonder what the next step is. Okay, I've already done this. No, I haven't. Sorry. Okay, so you've got, in the ag plane area, that's the last point I want to make on the slide. The ag plane guys, once you start seeing a lot of cracks, then you've got to start worrying about modifying the entire fleet because the statistics catch up to you. It's just kind of like the casinos. The casinos are ultimately going to win. You know, some people are going to come out ahead, some people are going to come out behind. The casino is always going to win. That's kind of the way it is with fatigue wear out, just like us. We're all going to die. Hate to tell you that, but we're all going to lose at some point in time there. Same sort of thing with these airplanes. We can do some major heart replacement surgery or whatever here to keep these guys going. So I'm not saying retire the airframe necessarily, although that may be a situation. Retirement would be put in a new spar, maybe a new wing, whatever. Okay, however we want to look at that. Okay, so if we can't find the cracks fast enough, we got to throw the part away, retire the part, and if we can, then we can do inspections until we get to a point where we just push the limit here, we're starting to see cracks, and then we've got to retire the part. Now, the tricky part is we may have solved the problem, say, for one specific part, but then there's another hot spot. And like the T6 people, they're looking at replacing the angles. And I told them yesterday, I said, that's a great idea, but if you've got new angles in a 60-year-old airplane, that's kind of like saying, okay, I had my knee replaced. Well, my hip's starting to bother me now, or does that fix my ticker? No. So there's always the next hot spot, okay? Now, I can't say much about the Malheur because obviously that accident is still going on. But this is straight from the NTSB's preliminary report. And I've done this. I've highlighted those areas, bolded them. Fatigue cracking in the lower rear wing spar cap, lower wing skin, and on an internal Z-stringer. And then they found evidence of fatigue cracking on the corresponding area on the left wing. So a 60-year-old airplane had over 30,000 hours on it. And I see fatigue cracking in 1, 2, 3 areas on that wing. That is what we call fatigue wear out. Multi-site damage, widespread fatigue damage, there's a lot of different words for it. It wasn't located to one teeny little part breaking that causes problems. No big surprise for an old airplane. Okay. So to kind of wrap this up here, susceptible areas if practical, inspect those guys. Okay, this is kind of a, if you were going to do it right, let's proactively go out and look at those areas if it's practical. Got to minimize the probability of cracking across the fleet. So if we start seeing a few cracks here and there, and I told the T6 people yesterday, I said, if we start seeing more than just a handful of cracks, then we may have to look at saying, you know, the chances of us missing a crack in an inspection are high enough that we really need to replace the angles at some point in time. You know, maybe it's 10,000 hours, 15,000 hours, whatever it might be. Okay, we've got ways of determining when that might be. And if we don't do it, it can cause bad things to happen. Even though these airplanes, like the Malheur is built like a tank, but it's an old airplane. Okay, how can we be proactive? Robust maintenance programs, routine inspections, monitor concerns, statistical risk assessment. We're starting to get into a little bit of that in Kansas City. Mark does that with the engines a lot, and parts replacement. Supplemental inspection programs, basically where to look, when to start looking, how often to look, and how to look. You know, do I do eddy current? Can I find a small enough crack visually? Those sorts of things. And then corrosion prevention and control programs, where and when to look, and then maintain those limits. This is what the airlines do. This is what our aging airplane rulemaking has put in place. Is these are mandatory, and we have CPCPs for all the big birds via AD. So this is what the big airlines guys are doing. It makes sense that in some way we do that for little airplanes as well. Okay, we're getting close to that form now. A&Ps are the first line of defense. The proper maintenance will slow the encroachment of aging. Find and fix. If you see something, fix it, keep going. Okay? If you've got manufacturer's instructions, and we realize that's an issue, if you've got manufacturer's instructions, use them. Pay close attention to the severe use aircraft. The way I like to equate that is crop dusters are a special breed. There's no doubt about that. But there are some crop dusters that have bigger belt buckles than others. Those are the guys that you want to make sure you're inspecting. Not that you shouldn't be inspecting all the airplanes real well. You might want to be paying special attention to his or hers. Same way with the pilots. If you know there's a pilot out there that likes to push the envelope, flies heavy all the time, that sort of stuff, pay attention to those guys. Okay? Airplanes using pipeline patrol, things like that, those are good ones. Report those service difficulties. Okay, Mark had talked about we don't have enough data to make good engineering decisions sometimes. Now we can make some pretty good decisions with a little bit of data. We did that on the Cessna 402 and we hit the nail on the head with that. We predicted that there would be airplanes in the fleet with wing spars cracked. And there were a lot of people said, you guys don't know what you're talking about. And about a year ago we found 3 of them. The spars were cracked and the cracks had been there for a year. So with a little bit of data, we can do some good here. You can help us identify chronic problem areas on small airplanes. You guys are the ones that are seeing these airplanes on a regular basis. And that form I handed out, if you know of an instance, and the guy, and a mechanic in our office says, he said, when I was out there at an FBO working on airplanes, I knew that Cherokees would come in. I had to tighten the bolts on the tails. They were always loose. That was something that he would count on. Well, there may be somebody that only sees a Cherokee once in a blue moon. He may not know that. So what we're trying to do is capture any tribal knowledge that you may have out there of things that you see on not necessarily a regular basis, but have seen more than once or twice, and you're smart enough to say, you know, that airplane, that model airplane, I'm going to look here because I've seen it before. If we can collect some of those war stories, because I'd like you, if you've got some instance of that, turn it in to me today or email me later, whatever it is. We've tried this at a couple IA seminars. The first one, I handed out the form, and then I got some sidetracked. I forgot to ask it back at the end. This is the guy that went from Orlando to Stevens Point in February, right? So remind me, if you've got some info, get it to us, because we realize the tribal knowledge is in rooms like this. And if we can pass that on to other mechanics, kind of keep a database of here are things to look for, we can start building special maintenance requirements, or not requirements, maintenance things to look for other airplanes.